there was a lady in the neighborhood, Miss Sugar. My mother and father called her Sugar. Miss Sugar, she always had on a man suit shirt. She was always dressed like a man. But she was a friend of our family because my mother and father always talked well of her and to her. And then I heard one day my mother was talking about how she was there in the neighborhood and my father was working in the Navy Yard or something, and she was pregnant. And there was these guys that would come around, and one of them was, and Miss Sugar would tell them, "No, you leave her alone. I got the girls you want over here."
Welcome to the Zami Nobla National Organization of Black Lesbians on Aging podcast. We are your sound source for Black lesbian herstory. I'm your host, Angela Denise Davis. This is the last of the interviews we recorded with women while we were in the Greater Bay Area last year. It is a phenomenal conversation with Joyce Penalver as she talks about growing up in Harlem during the 50s, her move west, and all the intersectionality that came to be a part of her life as she organized opportunities for Black lesbians to engage in community in San Francisco and Oakland. I know you'll enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed sitting down and talking with Joyce.
My name's Joyce Lillian Penalver, and my age is 78. I'm currently living in Vallejo, California. How I show up in the world is the question you asked. I know my feelings because that's how I show up to me in the world, which is most important to me, is to show up and be there for my community. And I see my community as the Black community, and especially the LGBT and Q and I.
Well, thank you for being part of our Zami Nobla podcast today. You are one of the beautiful women we've had a chance to interview when we were in the Bay Area this week. And so it's great to have you on the podcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself and where you grew up.
I grew up in Harlem, New York. In fact, in Harlem Hospital. It was a community. I felt very comfortable in that community until drugs came into my community. My family was there close. I had my grandmother, aunts and uncles about 5 blocks away, which I could walk to. I had my grandmother's 2 sisters, my aunts, my great aunts, in the other side, about another 5 or 6 blocks. And so that's my family. I lived with my mother and my father and my 2 brothers. It was great growing up. In the summer, it'd be really hot. I lived in what they call a tenement building. Sometimes we'd have to sleep out on the fire escape because it'd be so hot inside the apartment. But late at night, there would always be a storyteller out on the stoop. And my mother would allow us to stay out later because she could look right out the window and see the stoop and see us sitting on the stoop and knowing that the community was there watching us, but she was going to be sure to watch us too. My mother and father both belonged to social clubs. My mother would have women over to pay Pekino, and they would serve refreshments and that sort of thing. She always had that happening. And my father belonged to this club called the La Grande, and they would have 2 big events. They would have a boat ride in the summer that must have held at least 2,000 people. And on the boat ride, they would have bands. Most of them were Caribbean or Puerto Rican bands. And we would dance all the way, and we would go to places upstate where they would have pools and rides and all that stuff. So we would dance all the way up there. When we got there, we would picnic, and swim or do whatever, and then we come back. So, and that was every year. And then they had a New Year's Eve dance every year. And I couldn't go to that until I got to be about 16. But after what would happen at 12 o'clock, you go to church because you had to see the New Year in, and then you go to that dance. And that dance was from 1 to 6. So that's why I couldn't go until I got older. So I think that's how, even at a young age, a teenage, myself and my girlfriends, who were the young girls my age in the block, would have clubs. And, we'd meet, we have little refreshments, little sandwiches and Kool-Aid. Mm-hmm. And I think that was from following what I saw,
Yes, with your mom.
Right.
Yes.
So that's kind of was my existence.
Well, it's interesting because that's the Harlem of the 40s and 50s. And a lot has changed in Harlem from then till now.
Yes.
During those young years in Harlem, were you aware of the fact that you were attracted to women? Or attracted to your same sex? I guess because you were a girl then.
Well, I'm trying to pinpoint when that happened. Mm-hmm. I know my mother was an avid reader, and she used to go to the library and take me. Mm-hmm. And I know I was waiting till I could get my library card because I wanted to have my own book too. And so when that happened, I was really happy. And I know my mother had a club party at the house, and my aunt came over, and she said, I was downstairs, she said, come with me, I want to go up and get this person who was going to come to the club. And when I knocked on that door, and the door opened, here was this little girl there. And I was stunned, because she seemed so mature. She seemed like somebody that I could relate to. Mm. I didn't feel emotional that kind of feeling at that time. But, so the next day when I went downstairs and she was down there and I talked to her, she talked about going to the library. And so I said, yeah, so we went to the library together. And after that, we would go to the library, get books, talk about it. And she was as excited as I was about books. Hmm. And so that made us close friends. Mm-hmm. But I think getting books, my mother always had books around the house. And I don't know, because somebody mentioned this to me, I never thought of this. The Well of Loneliness was one of the books she had. Mm. And I read that book, and I resonated so much with the butch in it. Mm-hmm. I could understand the feelings of wanting to protect this woman and all the feelings. I understood all those feelings. And after that, when I was like in junior high school, I realized I had crushes then. But I did not want to be a lesbian because in my neighborhood, lesbians were put down so badly that I didn't want that kind of negativity coming at me, oh, bulldog, oh, this and that, and all this negativity that was said. And this was from my community. Now, this is my community.
Right.
And I'm a part of my community. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to be a negative part of my community. So I took that in. But I do realize now, and I don't know what order you want this to go in, but what I started to realize is there was a lady in the neighborhood, Miss Sugar. That's my mother called her mother. My mother and father called her Sugar. Mm-hmm. Miss Sugar. She always had on a man suit, shirt. Mm. She was always dressed like a man. Mm. But she was a friend of our family because my mother and father always talked well of her and to her when we went. When we saw her in the street. And then I heard one day my mother was talking about how she was there in the neighborhood and my father was working in the yard, the Navy Yard or something, and she was pregnant. And there was these guys that would come around, and one of them was, and Miss Sugar would tell them, no, you leave her alone. I got the girls you want over here. So I heard her saying this one day, So I said, oh, so that's how they became friends, you know. So apparently she was a madam or something. And but as far as I was concerned, she was just Miss Sugar. And so I would always stop and say, hello, Miss Sugar, and we stop and talk a little bit and stuff like that. Then I learned that my middle name is Lillian, which was Miss Sugar's name. And I never knew that. So my mother named me after Miss Sugar because she was her friend. All this came later.
Well, you know what interests me and what makes my little ears perk up is the fact that your mother had a copy of The Well of Loneliness in her personal library, a lesbian classic, and she was friends with Miss Sugar, and you got Miss Sugar's middle name.
Right.
Is there a backstory to this, perhaps?
The only backstory I know that I started to put together later was the fact that because my father was so friendly with Miss Sugar also, that I felt that she took care of my mother when my father wasn't there, you know. And but that's how I looked at it.
And maybe this speaks to, and I don't know because I'm not a part of that generation, but from some of the things I read, the way in which gay and lesbian people function in Black communities in the 40s and 50s, very differently from the way in which we see now, and Butch Miss Sugar being really a form of protection and safety and security for your mom.
Right. That's what I felt, you know. I don't know. But so I think I knew at a very young age that I loved women. But I got so much negativity about it. And they identified women as butch women. That they would call these names, you know. So I didn't want to, I said, I don't look like that. I don't act like that. Why you all call me that, you know. That didn't happen till much later. People started telling me, and these were people who were in the world. A good friend of mine, Rocky, who finally introduced me to the lesbian world, told me that I was gay.
And how old were you then?
I was 18, 19.
Did your parents know?
I'm sure they knew, but we never talked about it.
Was there ever a time when you talked with your parents about it?
Not until I was about 30, 35. We never talked about it. But when I started living with my first lover and having women around them, and of course they knew. They were sophisticated New Yorkers. They grew up in New York, you know. And so I think that's why, you know, they wasn't excited about it all, you know. But I didn't talk about it because I still was ashamed, I guess, you know. Rocky was always telling me, you know, I was gay. He said, I want to introduce you to some of my friends. So he took me to a party, and this was in Brooklyn, New York. And it was at a gay man's house, an older gay man's house. And the place was beautiful. You know, the bar was set up like a, you know, I mean, the place was just the music, everything. The people were suave and all this, you know. And there were gay women there. And then he introduced me to his two friends. And one of the women worked in the building that I had worked in. And I felt so comfortable, you know. I felt as though in this atmosphere and with these gay women around me, that I was home. I felt that this is the kind of community I would want to belong to.
So what was it like growing up a Black lesbian in the 40s and 50s in New York?
Growing up in the 50s, I didn't really come out until I was about 20. And so that was in the 60s. So when I came out, also at the same time that my friend was telling me about, before he did that, or during the same time, I don't know, there was another fellow that I worked with in Manhattan, down in the Wall Street district. And he also said he wanted to introduce me to someone. And he introduced me to this woman, Nikki. And, you know, he said, she's gay. These things just seem to happen. He said, she's gay and I want you to meet her. And I met her and I just thought she was wonderful. But I still wasn't ready, you know. But I was pretty much admitted to myself that this was what was happening. And then Rocky said he would take me to this party, and then things just evolved. So, then I started going, these two women who were a couple took me under their wing. And I would go to their house and stay with them on the weekend and go to parties and all that sort of thing. And in the whole gay lesbian community. And it was great because, you know, we partied, you know. And so, and then Nikki, I was like a pull, and 1 minute I was and then I wasn't and all this. But so she said, okay, I'm going to show you around. So she would take me to the clubs. She would take me to the clubs that Tubby had. Tubby was an entrepreneur who always had clubs. And they were always nice clubs. There wasn't no beat-up places. They were really nice with long bars and dance floors, and music was piped in so nicely, and, you know. And they were in Harlem, most of the clubs. And so when I started going to the clubs, and, you know, I kept saying, wow, I mean, it was like my soul opened up. You know, I just felt, so this is me, you know. When I was with those groups and around that community, I was me, you know. So now I'm about 21 or so. And I started seeing women. And I would always see, well, I wouldn't say I would always see, but one of the women was a woman that had 2 daughters. And, you know, I just was a naive young dyke, you know. So I would go to these different clubs, and I would go to these parties. And I met my first lover of 13 years, Jerry. And we had so much in common. Jerry grew up in Harlem, on the other side of town. I never met her. She didn't go to my school because I was on the east side. She was on the west side, and they had a district in between or something because we never went before. But also, she would tell stories of how she went to the library and how she loved the library and whatnot, you know. And so we became close friends, and that led into us becoming lovers and a couple. So now I'm up to 21. I always had jobs of like secretary, dictaphone operators, that kind of thing. That's what I went to school, Central Commercial. But I always wanted to do more, do different. So I used to go to night school and to get points, community college, to get points so I could get a degree. So affirmative action came up, and Jerry was able to get into college. And so she said, well, you need to go too. You go at night, and, you know, because I work full time, go at night. You know, she said, because you in the same category, you know, you fit under this category. So I did. I applied, and I went to school, went to start going to college. And I went to Baruch College because I was in a commercial school. I figured I was always meant to be in business or something. But Jerry was going to school, and she was in all these classes that were so interesting. You know, she would take Black Studies courses. She would take literature course because she was English major. And, you know, we would talk about the books that she was reading and all that. And so I said, I love that. So she said, well, why don't you transfer and come over here? So I said, I did. And that opened up another whole portion of my life, of African studies, of not knowing that you didn't know these things, you know. But here they were, you know. Here was our rich heritage, you know. I learned so many things about us that was so wonderful, you know. It was just one of the great times of my life.
and this was a very significant period for Black folks. You know, we're seeing the burgeoning of the civil rights. We're also seeing the 60s where we are on the verge of gay rights coming out. You're in New York City. What was all of those intersections leading to, and how did it feel living in that time?
Harlem was just wonderful. Wonderful. All the stores, we had taken over all the stores in Harlem. Black people was owning the stores. They had all these bookstores with all the African information and books about Africa, so that it was just I can't express it. Things that they show now on TV is what we studied. I mean, going to school was such a gift. But what was coming up at the same time was young. I'm older than most of the students were there. A lot of the students were able to get in the program straight out of high school with affirmative action. We were a little older. I definitely was a little older, maybe 25, 27 maybe, and they're like 18, 19, 20. They were young boys, and especially one young boy who was very smart and could be a leader, who was very misogynistic. Whenever we would have a class, he would try to say, well, don't you think the black woman should step down and let the black man talk? So they had Moynihan was saying that black men had a hard time because, you remember?
Daniel Moynihan, yes, right? yes. Yeah.
Because of the black women.
Right.
Holding them, because, we were holding them down, our black men down. And so this was always being pushed. And I always, all my life, have been told by men that, you need to keep quiet. And when you get married, you be different. You be put in your place. And things like that were told to me. And I never felt, I always got furious when that happened. So when then the feminist ideology and all these books and all this came out, also I took those courses. And I realized, this is what it's about. This is what they try to do to us and all this sort of stuff. So I became involved in the feminist movement as well as the nationalist movement. Because after learning all the history I learned, I felt that they will never let us be free. That's how I felt. And so I felt that we had to have our own. And learning history where we've had our own and where we've always been strong, and find out all the positive things about we had done in the past, which I hear what Brenda's saying. That's why it's so important for these young people to know what the past was, because it made a huge difference to me.
Being involved and connected with Black nationalism and understanding also that you were a lesbian, how did you merge those two realities?
That's a good question. I felt, and I feel, I'm kind of a person that try to give everybody a break. And in becoming a feminist and going into the groups and the classes and all of this, there was one group I went to at City College, that's where I went to CCNY, a young black boy from Trinidad was in our class. And he said that he was a feminist. And he understood what feminism was. And he understood, and he said that he was working towards feminism and making people understand and making the men understand that we all had to be equal. So I said, to myself, well, it's a possibility that some men do understand. It's not just because this crazy boy is always trying to bring it back to the man has to be in charge. And that's what I've been told all my life. Doesn't mean that there aren't these kind of people in the world. I may not know them, but apparently they're there. Because where did he get it from? So, so I felt, and also all the things that happened with Malcolm X. You could walk down 125th Street in those days, and Malcolm would be standing on the corner telling you where it's at and what's happening. That's the kind of stuff that was happening during that time.
What was that like? I can't even imagine.
it was just, I can't explain it. He was just there. You know, at that time you're going through it, you don't know it's going to be this big history and all this stuff coming later.
Right.
But you knew he was a great man. And then there were people saying other things too, you know. So, but that was the world then. Harlem was a black world at that time, like it had been before in the 40s and whatnot at that time. And this time, that's what we were doing, you know. Black power is what we was talking in school, and when I say I was a nationalist. There was King. Some of the people in that movement, too, were saying that, you know, he's just Uncle Tom. And I can understand that either. When they would call us, they would call people Uncle Toms. And I didn't go along. These are the things that pulled me away from just nationalism. Because you either did it their way or you wasn't doing it the right way.
Okay.
That's what I was getting from it. Because my father was raised by my aunt's husband. My aunt's husband raised my father, his two brothers, and then 2 other nephews from his brother. They all lived with my uncle, who was a Christian man, and took care. They would call him my Uncle Tom. When they said that, I thought of my Uncle Roscoe, who took care of everybody. Because he had to go to the white man. He rode the elevators down in by the theaters and whatnot. So I mean, all of had to put all this together, and so I didn't agree with a lot of what was happening, but I did agree with other things that was happening. So when I got out of school, I was a proud black woman and a feminist. Then when we came out of school, New York was in depression and weren't any jobs. So we went different places. We lived in Connecticut for a while because I could get a job. And because Jerry got a job right away because she went to graduate school and she became a librarian. She got a job in Connecticut, so that's where we moved. I got the jobs I always get, secretary. But now I'm on a higher level. I'm a secretary to vice presidents of a company. So we were there, and we come there with all this stuff that we got for CCNY, right, and other things. So a lot of our friends were moving to California, and we kept up with the California history and what was happening with them, with the Black Panthers and all the things that was happening in California. We knew California also had a strong feminist community, you know. So we decided that it was time to go. So that's when we came to California. So we got here 79, 80. We were breaking up because Jerry was dealing with some issues and I was dealing with others. I wanted to come out and make a change. I wanted to be involved in changing things, you know, in the women's community and as far as the black community was concerned. So when we came to California, and we didn't have the community that we had in New York, because our New York community were black women and black men. You know, we had quite a few black gay men in our community.
Oh, okay.
You know, so we come to California, and we wind up in San Francisco because that's where the people we knew lived. And but we come out, we free, but we're not really together. We living together, but we not really together. And then Jerry met someone, and she wasn't around. And so here I was, a free woman for the first time. And after all of this, and I'm about maybe 35, 37, something like that. So I'm a single woman out alone now. And I was going to the bars and the clubs and stuff, and just kind of being there, being around lesbianism. which is comfortable, And then I met a friend, Sima, who's still my friend now, almost 30 years later. She's a Jewish girl, and we started hanging out together. So we would go to different clubs. By this time, I think we started Zulema. Yeah, we started Zulema before we wasn't living together. We were still living together when I'm trying to get the dates and stuff together. But anyway, we started Zulema, and that was after, because I had met Sima before, and then we started Zulema, and then we had all these women around us. So I had a community,
So tell us a little bit more about Zulema. I'm really curious about the naming of it and what it was. What was it?
Zulema was a woman of color lesbian group. Jerry and I named Zulema because there was this black singer named Zulema. I don't know if you ever heard of her.
No.
But I'm pretty sure that's how we named it.
Huh.
And when we started having the meetings, we had it because of lack of culture around us. That was one of the main reasons, because we both came from Harlem, remember, and the communities were very similar. And then I grew up with people having groups and things like that around me.
Right.
So I guess that's how this came about. We said, yeah, you go every place you go. It's not but white women. Where's the sisters? The sisters were here. They were in Oakland and all these other places, but we were in San Francisco at that time. And it was sisters coming to San Francisco. And they were in Oakland necessarily. We did have some women come to the group from Oakland, but most of the sisters, the women that came to this group, were new to San Francisco, new to the city, just new, and they came looking for a place, a group, and that's how that developed.
You mentioned that in New York, black gay men and black lesbians worked together, but that was not necessarily true in San Francisco.
Right.
What were some other, I'm just curious, I know that there was also a shift in time in terms of what happened in the 60s and 70s between New York and San Francisco, but I'm curious, and because I love history so much, what were some other ways that you saw differences in these communities, East and West?
First of all, there was a black feminist movement, and we didn't call it feminist. I had come up from, reading all the books in school and being around that. So, and there was the white feminist movement. And the things, some of the black women who got into the feminist movement here in San Francisco was talking about things that I didn't want to be a part of. Like they were saying that boys, after they were 10, they didn't want young boys to be in the community. They had to separate. It was all this separatism. So, and they didn't want any men around, period. And that's just wasn't where I came from. So, I felt they had their reasons for that, and I read those reasons in the book and whatnot, and it related very much to me too as a woman, because a lot of the things that they went through, these white women went through, we did. Right. Too, also as women, have not to do with black, had to do with being a woman. But some of the ways they were saying to handle this was not ways that I was going to do, So that's when I saw the difference between white feminists and black women who were feminists. And I had gone to, my friend Ceci had taken me to a meeting. Audre Lorde was there. The two sisters were there. There were a lot of people who were, they were feminists. They said they were feminists. And I could understand their feminism. I said, well, this is feminist as I know it, right? Then I come here, and they're saying, different things. You know, later I got to understand what that was about. That's the way they handled it. But so that was one thing. Not being as integrated as, well, I guess I was pretty much not that integrated in New York. I mean, I didn't hang out with many white people. And my two buddies that I had, two gay men that I knew, that I worked with, one of them, he had a lot of white male friends, you know. And knowing him and him bringing us to his house and whatnot, I got to know them on a different level. So when I come here, this is a different culture. I wasn't used to having all these white friends. I guess that was the gist of it.
Okay, yes. Now, when you say the two sisters, I could make some assumptions, but I don't want to, because I probably want you to name those two sisters you're talking about.
Right, Beverly and Barbara Smith. That's
the assumption I was going to make.
Yeah, they were the two sisters that was at this meeting.
And the reason I bring them up is because them in conjunction with Audre Lorde, that whole East Coast New York sensibility really is very interesting to me, because it's very different from what we feel and hear when we talk about what happened in the West Coast. But at the same time, what interests me is the fact that so many women came east to west. And the west they came to in the 70s and 80s was after we saw the civil rights movement. We saw the beginning of the gay rights movement, Stonewall. We saw the beginning of the disability rights, ADA.
Yeah.
And so in a sense, it was a very different time and a different space that had this wonderful birth of so much going on in the Bay Area. I'm always intrigued by that, because you can't erase what happens with time. And just that whole piece you talked about in terms of really looking at interracial relations in the Bay Area and how that was very different from back east.
Right. I mean, now, I'm a Harlemite. You know, there are a lot of black people that didn't necessarily go through this, but my whole world was more or less black. You know, from the time I don't know, people born in different places might have went through different things and felt differently. But that was my experience. When we went to, there was a weekend gathering that Ceci and I went to, and it was in Boston. That's when Audre Lorde and Barbara and them, the sisters and some other women. And it was that they declared themselves feminists. And it wasn't always the case around us where we were. But here were people that are saying, yeah, they were feminists, because there were black people who felt that this was a white woman's thing, being a feminist.
Right.
So,
right.
So Ceci said, well, no, that's not the case. There's plenty. I'm going to take you to this meeting with me, weekend thing. Okay. And it was great, because what's so different about it, we cooked together, we laughed together, we was like family. You know, it was like being with family. It was very comfortable, and we could talk about the things that we felt as feminists. And so, that was a great experience. So here we are in California, and it was great. Because here I am free for the first time. I didn't realize that I wasn't free, but now I'm free, and I'm here in California. So it was a lot of dating and a lot of going to clubs and a lot of things. But I guess I come from a couple's perspective. My mother and father was together until they died. And I guess because I'm always in relationships, and they last. You know what I mean? Like Jerry and I was together for 13 years. And then I was together with a white woman, me, for 9 years. And that's me. You know, I just don't stay in 1 or 2 years, you know. I build family.
Yes.
And so.
And now you're married.
I'm married.
To your partner of how many years?
Of 25 years, Cheryl.
Cheryl, 25 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's some legacy there. That's some legacy. I want to talk about that, but I want to come back to your organization and talk a little bit more about that. Because again, we talk about the Bay Area, we talk about these organizations for Black lesbians and lesbians of color as being very foundational. Mm-hmm. So tell me about the life of the organization, the lifespan.
Okay. Organizations start with when I was in San Francisco and I was no longer in the relationship. I was thinking and wanted to do the things that I came to California to do. Mm-hmm. So I went to this women's center they had in San Francisco. It was a little office down on Market Street. Mm. And from there, and they was really organizing to get this women's building. Mm-hmm. And so I was there. I would have phone contact, I would have a time when I manned the phone, a woman the phone. And so I was learning so many things about the community and what was happening and how they was going to get this women's building together. And so they went through all that. There were things, we held different, they would have dances and all these different things to get money in order to, get the women's building. So they did get money, and they got the women's building in a certain period of time. And then I worked in the women's building for a while. Then through Zulema is when I met Vivian. And she was working for the newspaper. And she's a writer. I give it these writers. And she was a writer, and she encouraged me to come help out at the newspaper, which I did. I didn't write. I did write it when they had a Black woman's issue, and I wrote an article then. But I didn't as a rule. As a rule, I was there and did the other kind of work that they needed done. So during this time, these are all the different things that I was doing. And we had Zulema, and I'm trying to think of what else. There was so much happening. And
Zulema was that basically support groups where women met monthly, or?
I'm trying to think if it was. I think it started out maybe weekly, but then was more like monthly as it went along. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that came from the women from that group was some women came, and they were the ones that had the Black Lesbian conference that developed in NEA. Ah. Mm-hmm. So, different women would come and they could organize their different organizations and get different people to do different things. Okay. And that was one of the big things that's come out of it, because NEA is still together, right? Mm-hmm. So,
so Zulema really gave birth to a lot of different things then.
Mm-hmm. It did.
And how long did it continue?
There was when there were women who came who wanted the Zulema group to work on having a conference. Mm-hmm. And we got into a dispute, and that's when it ended, really. Because some of the women did want, had to take sides and all of that. That's what we have to always be careful of. Mm. I learned a lot from that. And I was a big part of not being open to giving as much space as I should have to the group that was going to do this conference. Mm-hmm. And I could say that now. Mm-hmm. But then I didn't understand.
Was there just fear of what was the greatest conflict there?
Well, the greatest conflict was that the meetings and the cohesiveness that we had with Zulema was disrupted because this other thing was happening. All we needed to do was get together and do it. Mm-hmm. But that didn't happen. And so Zulema was sacrificed for the greater good, so they felt. And that's what happened. At the time, I didn't think that, but I learned with time and age that that's what happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that, before we close our interview, I would love to talk to you about is just longevity in relationship and your 25-year union with your wife, whom you married. You've not been married for 25 years, but you've been in a relationship for 25 years.
No, definitely wasn't married for 25 years.
You know, again, when we talk about young Black lesbians and young, as they say, queer people today, a lot of folks don't know what it's like to be in a relationship for 25 years with someone, or even be able to imagine that. As we strive to be a resource for aging women and young women as well, what are some things that you think is important for being in relationship and longevity, particularly since you have had series of long relationships?
Number one is you have to like, I feel, in all my relationships, I really liked the people I was with, you know. And that's, to me, that's number one for me. You get to know the person, you like the person, you're attracted to the person, you know. For me, that happens many times. It's happened with time. So, like this last relationship, I felt Cheryl was too young.
What's the age difference between the two of you?
14 years.
Okay.
So we were working together, and we became friends, and I really liked her a lot, you know. I thought she was going to be my buddy, you know, like I have other buddies, you know. So when I broke up with my then lover, who was a me, and I was looking for a place, because Cheryl was born in Richmond, California. So she's a Californian.
Ah.
And so, you know, I was saying, get a place. I can't keep this place. We're breaking up, and I'm not going to be able to keep this place. So she said, well, I could help you look for a place. So, you know, we were friends, you know, so we was looking around and whatnot. And one day she told me that she was in love or had a crush on somebody. And I said, yeah. You know, but when she told me it was me, I said, well, you know, that's going to be difficult because we work together. And, you know, I don't know. I'm kind of, I could, at that time especially, I was more a pragmatist, you know. You know, you don't go with someone that you're working with and all that sort of thing. But anyway, that didn't stop the show.
Did you have some concerns about her being younger at that point in time?
I did, but these younger women always, Vivian. And if you care about them, too, you know, I wasn't really that much worried by then because I wasn't this old. You know, now you look at 14 years, it's huge. But when back then, it wasn't that, to me, I didn't feel that old, you know.
Well, how is it now being in that intergenerational relationship and being older?
Well, first of all, I was Cheryl's first. And when we got together, she wanted to tell everybody. You know, that's the new generation, right? I said, you told that person, you did that. You know what I mean? When I came out, I didn't tell everybody.
Okay.
You know, but it's a new freedom that they have. And I realized that it's because of the hardships that we had allows them this freedom that they had.
Right.
You know. So, It's a lot of that, but she comes from a strong family tie too, like I do. And so many of the things that are important to me is important to her. That's kind of how it is. We've had our ups and downs. You know, Shell has a son, and she had a son. And we've had some difficulties. He wasn't happy about it. So, you know, we, like families and couples do, we've had our ups and downs.
And how long have you been married?
We got married in 2014.
Okay.
So 6 years.
I'm curious, you know, you have this wealth of history from Harlem to the Bay Area. The world changed so much between the time you were born and even by the time you got to San Francisco, and certainly now. As you look back over your life and who you are as a Black lesbian, now, warning, this is a big question, so we can take it chunks. What have you learned about the world in which we live? And we can break that down in terms of what have you learned about being a Black lesbian, being a Black woman in this country, being someone who is free within herself, as your Harlemite Langston Hughes would say.
Yes, love
free within yourself.
My favorite poet.
Yes, yes. What have these years afforded you in terms of wisdom?
Well, I think I've had a wonderful life. One of the gifts that I've had that's helped me, or that I feel most happy about, I think, is learning. You know, I love learning. I learned that I have a diagnosis of depression at times, and how that came to me because of what happened to my community when I was younger. My brother became a heroin addict at 13, and I carried that for quite a while, didn't understand. And then when I found out that therapy could help you through these things, and I found out it wasn't his fault, and what this whole society is about, and about us as African American people, it gave me back my brother, and it gave me back a gift that I felt I wanted to give others. And that's when I went to graduate school and got my degree and became a therapist. And I worked, my specialization was addiction. And so I worked with women and children who had been addicted. And I saw how the communities had so vastly changed. How families had been so broken. And that coming from that, and then being there for these women and letting them understand that I understood, you know, and that it could be better, and they were better. I think that's the most joy I've gotten out of life, to see these women grow and fight and come from things that my community never experienced when I was growing up, you know. They didn't have to fight all of the things they had to fight just to stay alive, you know. So I love the work that I did as a therapist. And, you know, what I count as gifts for myself today is I love to read since I was 6 years old, and still do, and still do it today. I love music, you know. You know, I love life, and I think life has been so great to me, you know. And so, you know, I guess that's just it. That's all I could say.
Thank you for sharing your story with us and letting us know how we can really move across the landscape of our life from many different places in the world, physically and metaphorically, and still be at a place where we're looking forward to new possibilities. Joyce, thank you today for being part of our Black lesbian history.
Thanks for having me.
As I've said before, I love a great story and a great storyteller. Joyce was so candid in how she talked about growing up in Harlem and all of the wonderful opportunities and challenges that she faced in San Francisco and Oakland. What an incredible, candid story. Joyce, thank you so much for sharing your life with us and allowing us to preserve a little bit of Harlem culture through the telling of your story. Thanks again. And to our listening audience, as always, we enjoy you being a part of what we do. Let us know you like it. As Nina Simone says, if you like it, let me know it. Don't be psychic or you'll blow it. Hey, I'd love to hear from you. Wherever you listen to the podcast, leave a rating, leave a comment. And until next time, have a sweet one.